Imagine this: an MRI machine in a hospital suddenly shuts down. A chip factory's production line slows, a rocket launch gets delayed, and the fiber manufacturing needed for high-speed internet comes under pressure. From the outside, these things do not seem connected at all, but there is an invisible thread between them: helium. The same helium that many people think of as nothing more than the gas used in party balloons. That is exactly where the fear begins. Because if a gas becomes scarce, one that quietly works inside critical industries like modern healthcare, semiconductors, aerospace, and telecom, the impact travels very far. And that is exactly what is happening right now. Along with oil and gas, the Middle East war has also jolted the global helium supply chain. And the world is suddenly being reminded of just how much responsibility this light gas actually carries. The most interesting part of helium's story is that you cannot simply manufacture it in an ordinary factory. It cannot be industrially synthesized on scale the way hydrogen can. Helium comes almost entirely as a byproduct of natural gas processing. That means usable helium only comes from places that have helium-rich natural gas fields. That is why its global supply remains heavily dependent on just a handful of countries and facilities. According to the US Geological Survey's 2026 Mineral Summary, helium production is limited, storage is difficult, and the supply chain has already been fragile. In such a situation, if one major producer suddenly stops, the ripple effect becomes very sharp. That is exactly the vulnerability the war exposed. According to Reuters reports from March 2026, Qatar, which supplies roughly one-third of the world's helium, was hit by serious disruption after the conflict. Qatar Energy declared force majeure. Helium output was affected as LNG processing stopped, and the disruptions linked to Ras Laffan industrial city shook the entire market. One Reuters report said that the Qatar LNG halt exposed the fragility of the helium supply chain, spot prices jumped, and market participants warned of shortages. In another report, Air Liquide openly said that a short-term helium shortage was expected because of the Middle East conflict. Because helium comes out of natural gas processing, people often treat it like a side character in the oil and gas story. But in many sectors, it actually plays the lead role. According to helium usage data from the US Geological Survey from 2023 to 2026, helium is used in analytical lab and specialty gases, MRI, controlled atmospheres, fiber optics, semiconductors, aerospace pressurizing, leak detection, lifting gas, and diving. In other words, this is not a luxury gas, but an industrial utility gas. And its biggest qualities: being non-flammable, chemically inert, having an extremely low boiling point, and remaining usable at ultra-low temperatures, make it unique. In many places, there is either no direct substitute for it, or no practical one. First, let us talk about healthcare. The powerful superconducting magnets inside MRI machines have to be maintained at very low temperatures. Liquid helium does exactly that. The National Academy's study on helium impact clearly says that the medical use of liquid helium in MRI systems is critical because it acts as a refrigerant for superconducting magnets. If helium supply becomes tight, MRI servicing, refill costs, and ultimately the economics of scanning can all be affected. Reuters and medtech industry coverage have also described the recent shortage as a concern for the medical imaging sector. So helium scarcity is not just a factory problem. It can also become a problem of diagnostic delays and rising healthcare costs. Now let us move to the semiconductor industry. Today, phones, laptops, data centers, EVs, telecom gear, and AI servers all rest on microchips. And chip manufacturing needs an ultra-clean, tightly controlled environment. According to Reuters coverage from March 2026, the tightening helium supply had already begun affecting global tech supply chains. Chip-linked hubs like South Korea, Taiwan, and Malaysia raised concerns over helium stocks, premiums, and supply rerouting. USGS usage data also shows controlled atmospheres, fiber optics, and semiconductors as major parts of helium demand. That means for the chip world, helium is not an optional gas. It is part of process reliability. If supply breaks, delays, cost escalation, and prioritization can become unavoidable. In fact, helium is valuable in chip making for several reasons. It is inert, which means it does not react. It helps with heat handling and clean atmosphere applications. In some processes, helium is used for purge gas, cooling support, and contamination control. That is why, after the conflict, Asian chipmakers began building stock and trying alternative sourcing. Reuters reported that major South Korean chipmakers Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix tried to cushion the impact through helium inventories and US sourcing. That in itself is a signal that the helium shortage is no longer theoretical. Supply managers are treating it like a real operational risk. Now let us move to aerospace. Rocket science is quite literally dependent on helium. A 2024 Reuters explainer and NASA technical documents show that helium is used to pressurize rocket propellant tanks, actuate valves, purge engines, and support cryogenic systems. The reason is the same. Helium is inert, lightweight, and can remain gaseous even at extremely low temperatures where other gases are no longer practical. NASA documents specifically mention helium pressurization systems. So when someone talks about SpaceX, NASA, ISRO, or the broader launch ecosystem, helium is silently present inside it. A rocket launch looks glamorous, helium stays invisible. But without it, launch safety can be compromised. Helium also plays a surprisingly large role in telecom and internet infrastructure. It is used in fiber optics manufacturing for controlled atmospheres and ultra-clean production conditions. USGS usage categories explicitly list controlled atmospheres and fiber optics. This means helium is also indirectly present in high-speed data networks, undersea communications, telecom backbone, and broadband infrastructure. That is why the impact of a shortage does not remain limited to hospitals and chip fabs. It can reach digital infrastructure costs too. When such a foundational gas becomes scarce, even the data economy cannot remain untouched. Helium is used in deep-sea diving for a very different reason: to avoid nitrogen narcosis and high-pressure breathing problems in deep water. Helium-based breathing mixtures are used along with oxygen. In the USGS helium consumption breakdown, diving appears as a separate category. It may seem like a niche application to the common person, but for commercial diving, underwater repairs, offshore work, and scientific dives, it is mission critical. In other words, helium scarcity is not just a surface world problem, it is an underwater world problem too. There is another misconception, that the biggest impact of helium shortage will be on balloons. The truth is that, during a crisis, low priority uses are the first to be cut. Reuters wrote in its helium price report that during shortages, critical uses like medical imaging and aerospace are prioritized, while lower-tier applications like party balloons may face rationing. That means the market itself recognizes that helium's real value is not in celebration, but in civilization. The balloon image may be catchy, but the truth involving MRI, chips and rockets is far more serious. Now let us return to Qatar, because that is the epicenter of this crisis. Qatar sits on one of the world's biggest natural gas clusters, and helium comes out of that same gas processing chain. According to Reuters reports, after Iran-linked attacks and conflict escalation, Qatar's LNG operations were affected, helium output took a hit, and some estimates suggested that a large share of global helium supply suddenly moved into the risk zone. One Reuters report said that attack-related disruption could reduce Qatar's helium output by around 14% annually. Other reports put Qatar's share of global helium at around one-third. It is exactly this concentration that makes the market fragile. Logistics made the crisis worse. Helium cannot be understood with the logic of an ordinary gas cylinder. Liquid helium requires cryogenic conditions, has boil-off issues, is not easy to store, and needs specialized transport containers. Reuters and tech supply chain coverage said the market has limited spare production capacity and that liquid helium shipping comes with its own constraints. Tom's Hardware even reported that 200 specialized helium containers were stuck near the Strait of Hormuz. In other words, supply was squeezed not only because production stopped, but also because transport bottlenecks hit. That is the double shock. Upstream is in trouble, and downstream is too. The effect on prices showed up almost immediately. Reuters wrote that the helium shortage accelerated premium pricing, supply rationing, and alternative sourcing costs. And those costs can eventually be passed on to hospitals, manufacturers, and industrial users. For India, this issue becomes even bigger because India is not a major helium producer and remains dependent on imports. Reuters India macro reporting has spoken of downside risks to energy costs and supply disruptions because of the Middle East conflict. There was no India-wide official price bulletin specific to helium, but Financial Express and other Indian business reports clearly wrote that liquid helium used in MRI scanners and chip manufacturing had been hit by supply snarls, and that Indian healthcare and manufacturing could feel the impact. In such a situation, if imports become expensive, freight rises, and delivery timelines turn uncertain, pressure on Indian users is natural. The healthcare sector may feel this impact the fastest, because MRI systems need helium not as a nice-to-have, but as a must-have. Some modern low-helium or sealed MRI designs have certainly emerged, but the large installed base across the world still depends on helium-cooled systems. A 2025 review in PubMed discussed the shift from helium-cooled to low-helium MRI systems, which indirectly shows that traditional MRI architecture remains vulnerable to helium supply risks. So if the shortage continues for long, refill prioritization, maintenance delays, and pressure on scan costs can all become real concerns. The story is similar on the semiconductor side as well. Many chip makers have said they currently have a few months of stock, especially in places like South Korea, where Reuters mentioned inventories of 4 to 6 months. But stockpiles do not last forever. If the conflict drags on, Qatar takes time to restart, and alternative production remains limited, then real bottlenecks can emerge after reserves begin getting burned. And this dependence of the chip industry now runs all the way into the AI boom, server farms, smartphones, and automotive electronics. That means helium shortage can indirectly affect consumer electronics prices and delivery cycles as well. If the war stretches longer, the biggest question is this: what are the alternatives? Some diversified suppliers, especially US-linked sources, may offer temporary relief. Reuters wrote that South Korean chip makers and industrial gas players like Air Liquide are trying to soften the impact by increasing helium sourcing from the US. But market experts say spare capacity is limited, and in many critical uses, the no easy substitute situation remains intact. That is why people are beginning to see the helium crisis as being less visible than an oil shock, but just as strategic. The biggest lesson in this whole story is that the modern economy also rests on things most ordinary people do not even notice. We think the world runs on crude oil, chips, data, hospitals, and rockets. The truth is that all of this rests on many invisible materials, gases, and supply chains. Helium is one of them. Its crisis reminds us that geopolitics does not stop at the petrol pump. It reaches the MRI room, the fab clean room, the satellite launch pad, and the fiber drawing tower too. That is why tension in the Middle East is dangerous. Not only because it changes headlines, but because it also shakes those unseen inputs on which the world's high-tech structure stands. So if someone asks why helium is so important, the answer is very simple. Because it is the backbone of the systems that quietly keep modern life running. It keeps MRI machines cold, helps chips get manufactured, safely pressurizes rockets, supports fiber optics production, and gives deep-sea divers a breathable mixture. And if someone asks why the war is causing such a severe shortage, the answer is just as clear. Because global helium supply depends on a few selected natural gas hubs, Qatar is one of the most important among them. And that is exactly where disruption happened. Production stopped, shipping got stuck, prices jumped, and the world finally understood that a shortage of a light gas can become very heavy indeed. If this video has taught you something new, or if you feel this information should reach more people, don't forget to like and share the video. Your small share can become valuable and useful information for someone else. If you have any questions related to this topic, or if you would like to share your opinion with us, be sure to write in the comment box. We read every question and suggestion from you, because your feedback inspires us to create better content. And if you want to keep receiving such interesting and reliable information about business, the economy, and the world in the future, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel GRT Business and also press the bell icon so that you get notifications of every new video directly. At GRT Business, we always strive to provide you with accurate, balanced, and reliable information. Our news and analysis are prepared based on information obtained from various news agencies, public sources, and public opinion. We make every effort to verify and validate each fact as much as possible. But in case of any possible error or dispute, the responsibility lies with the respective sources. Our only aim is to present you with a correct and trustworthy perspective so that you can understand any topic better.